Here. Hey, welcome everyone. Today my guest is Sue Rosen, and she is an executive coach primarily to, but not exclusively to, CFOs and aspiring CFOs. So welcome, Sue.
Hi, April. Lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm going to let you talk a little bit about what you do, how long you've been doing it. Like we talked about your primary client, but give us a little background on you.
Thanks, April. I started my career, well, a long time ago now. I started straight out of uni joining a chartered accountant practice in London. And so I saw that as being the road to getting qualified in accounting. And then I always anticipated that I would move into a broader business role. I didn't really think accounting was my passion. It wasn't something I had been dying to do. It was just a time when, finishing uni, looking for a job, that was, oh, look, I could do that. So I fell into it a little bit by accident in a lot of
Mm.
ways. And the kind of 3 or so years that you spend working in practice in England whilst also getting that chartered accounting qualification, I decided that wasn't for me. I didn't want
Got
to
it.
stay in professional practice. So I knew my next move would be out into a commercial organization. But that was also then when I took the plunge and I came to Australia. So I moved to Australia. I started working on. I'll try and keep. I'll condense it. I'll. Came to Australia, started working in commercial roles in different kinds of organizations. Started in the entertainment industry, working with a theatrical producer actually, and then moved into a recruitment business for a long time, where we grew very rapidly and went through a public listing process. I then moved into
And were
financial
you working in
services.
accounting at this point, or FP&A, finance? Still accounting in all these roles, it was primarily accounting.
Well, this is a long time ago, April. We didn't really differentiate, especially
Oh,
in the
okay.
smaller, medium-sized businesses. If you ran a finance team, I ran the finance team. A head of finance or a financial controller was across everything finance related. We didn't have, especially we were, what you call a medium-sized company. So not a massive organization with different teams doing everything. So it really incorporated, what we used to call management accounting, I suppose, before FP&A became a thing.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Makes sense. They didn't bifurcate them like
so
the way we do today.
yeah, no, we weren't doing that at the time, and especially in the smaller end of town. So I I always had this niggling feeling that I wanted to do something different, that I actually wanted to step away from this accounting and finance piece. My next role after that was as a CFO with a small private equity funds manager. So I kind of moved into financial services and still had this niggling, what am I going to do that's different? What would I really like to do that's different? And I was at a point where I was feeling stuck and I wanted to try something new. And I had some career coaching myself. And as I was going through that process, I went, oh, this is actually really powerful. It's making me reflect and think about things that I've never thought about before. And actually, I'd like to do what she's doing, about the coach. She was coaching me. And that was 10 years ago, or a little over, actually, coming up to 11 years ago, that I started exploring coaching as a possibility. I started taking training, thinking I may follow coaching, or even if I stay leading finance teams, accounting and finance teams, coaching is always going to be a really valuable skill. So, I encourage everybody in leadership roles to take some coaching courses to really build their skills in that area. And I did that and I loved it. So then I fully immersed myself and took on some postgraduate studying and started to build a practice. So I had a 5-year period where I worked part-time with a small private equity funds manager. And in the other couple of days a week, I was studying, building up my certifications, qualifications, and also building a practice. So this is why I come to a place now where I always say I do work primarily with CFOs, aspiring CFOs, and their teams, because I have that background. I understand the language, I understand the context and that environment in which finance leaders are working. But it doesn't mean I don't work with some, other leaders as well.
Sure. Yeah.
And
That
that's what brings me to today.
Yeah, that's a cool story. That's interesting that, you kind of always knew that finance wasn't your be all end all, but it played so well into who you've become. And so now you're the
Mm,
perfect fit to be able to advise, like you said, aspiring CFOs and CFOs. And you also bring up another really great point about coaching. You knew that even if you didn't pivot, that coaching would be a great asset as a CFO. And so when you also talk about, like, with your clients, the fact that when we think of CFOs, a lot of us think, very highly technical, right? Very numbers oriented and numbers driven. But that's changing, especially as CFOs are being brought into these more strategic roles and expected to look forward instead of always facing backward. And so to do that takes an executive presence. And you talk
mm.
about that being a skill that is more important than the technicalities of, being the numbers person. So tell us a little bit about how you coach clients around that, developing that executive presence.
Yeah, let me just say, first of all, April, yeah, a level of technical competence is, of course, foundational. That's table stakes. That's what's going to give you entry to get into the game, so to speak. But once you want to progress beyond that, you need to start looking beyond your technical skills, because as you're building a team, you can't be the expert in everything. And where this becomes challenging often for finance leaders is that we have been respected, well regarded, and rewarded for being the technical or the subject matter expert. And so that's really quite embedded in our psyche that, I need to know everything and I need to be across all of the details. And as we progress up the ladder, it's not always possible to be across all of the details. And you need to start to let go of that need to be right and have all the answers. You need to lean into trusting the people that work for you. You've got the subject matter experts now working underneath you. So you need to lean into building your trust with those people. You also need to become much more influential across both your peers in terms of, I think every finance leader, every CFO is a significant change agent within an organization. CFOs are increasingly asked, required to run big change initiatives, whether it's digital transformations or changes in business model. It is really, change is a massive part of the role, and it's continual, it's ongoing. So how do you manage that? And in order to do that, you need to be having conversations with your peers and your stakeholders all the time. You need to be influential in those conversations, have the credibility that they listen to what you say, and a level of trust, again, so that they are trusting that you can deliver even when you don't actually know every answer. We're all operating in an environment which is full of complexity and ambiguity. And none of us like uncertainty. But how do people rely on us to still deliver in this environment of continual uncertainty and ambiguity and complexity? And that, I think, really is where cultivating your executive or your leadership presence is really critical.
Yeah, it's
Um,
not, I mean, it sounds really challenging. Now that you're describing all of these elements, it's like, oh my gosh. So how do you do it? Like, where do you start as a
yeah,
coach? Like, coaching someone how to function and lead while also letting go of that side of you that needs to be right. And that, like you said, you always expected yourself and others expected you to have all the answers. And now you're expected to lead without all the answers.
yeah, absolutely. So there is a challenge there, and that's where we have to start. So I work with a model that I've developed that I work with clients on around developing leadership presence, and I see the three key elements as being confidence, humility, and connection. So I start with people with doing a really deep dive into who are you and who do you want to be as a leader. And this is not about confidence for confidence sake or being, it's not about bravado, it's not about being the loudest voice in the room. What I'm talking about is real grounded confidence in oneself. So this is about increasing our self-awareness around our own reactivity. You know, what are the things that send me into a tailspin? What are the things that have me reacting so that I lash out at people or withdraw and stay silent? Because neither are productive and effective. And so, you know, you're building self-awareness around these things. And then also beyond that is understanding our strengths and how can I leverage my strengths? You know, not all CFOs have the same combination of talents and strengths and experiences. How do I leverage what I bring to the table? So, you know, we do a lot of deep dive into, I bring a lot of mindfulness practices to my work with clients because that helps them with that reactivity. Emotional regulation is massively important because that's how people develop that trust that you can handle things when there's pressure and there's chaos. And then leaning into my strengths. What are the things I do really well that I can elevate? What are the areas where I need to ensure that I've got people around me that are looking after? And we also go into, you know, the stories of my assumptions and my beliefs, because, you know, one of the beliefs I potentially have to let go is that I have to know every single detail. And that's not easy to let go of. So it's about practice. It's sometimes about trial and error. How would it be to delegate more, to, you know, to develop and empower your staff so you can delegate more and have a review processes in place so that you gain reassurance that you're getting the information that you do need. So that's kind of the real confidence area. Then I look at humility. Humility is about, it's not a false modesty. It's about how do I now, I've done some inward looking. Now, how do I look to other people? How do I invite other people's contributions? Where can I be compassionate and listen more actively so that I see new perspectives? This is where we sometimes get trapped. And I have had clients who get trapped in this, in that they are appearing potentially as arrogant or like they think they know it all. And that's because they are leaning hard on their technical expertise and they're arriving, they're very smart. You know, a lot of CFOs, very smart, very intelligent, quick to come up with solutions. That's not always helpful when you want to collaborate and build the best possible way forward for the team or the organization. It's actually, how can you move into a space, be silent or ask questions and elicit the contributions of others, because collectively we will come up with better ideas. And so I have known CFOs, I've worked with CFOs who their focus, they were getting, I'm thinking of somebody in particular, you know, was getting his peers in the leadership team offside because he would come in going, we need to do this, this, and this, and this. And it actually, it wasn't really arrogance that he thought he was better than everyone else. He's just jumped 6 steps ahead because that's how he thinks. But it was getting them offside because they were going, they didn't know what his thought process was. He hasn't asked for anybody else's contributions. He's looking at it very much from this finance lens. And there are people in the room who are bringing brilliant perspectives from sales or marketing or operations, engineering, you know, depending what the other areas are. And so for him, the challenge is, you know, to put himself a reminder before every meeting to stop and take a breath, ask a question, and really listen, get curious. You know, it's shifting from listening to respond to listening to understand. So that is where, sometimes there's a challenge. And then the third part is connection, which is ensuring you're building your relationships both inside and outside of the organization, and cultivating those networks, finding places and people who will spark new ways of thinking.
I
And
like that.
also, there's a piece there about building your own profile. I'm often encouraging my clients to get out there and speak on panels and engage in public discussion around finance leadership or business leadership or what's happening in their industry. Get out of your own lane as well. I think that's massively valuable. Is don't just stick to the CFO forums and the networking among CFOs. Get out there and really meet the other leaders in your industry.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm listening to this and I'm just thinking this sounds like so supportive. Like if I were a CFO, because a lot of the shift that's happening, there's even these roles now that are both COO and CFO because the roles have
Yeah.
become so, close together.
Yeah.
And that's just a lot of pressure, you know. And
Mm.
so as I'm listening to you talk, it sounds grounding. It sounds very supportive to have someone in your corner who's helping you work on all of these things and not just um trying to figure it out on my own. And so as you have walked CFOs and aspiring CFOs through this process, what do you see on the other side? And I know that we never really like arrive like, hey, I'm there. But, there is a point where you're like, oh, wow, this like there is that click point, with new things that we learn where it's like, oh, this really does work. So what do you see when people realize that, these non-technical skills really do matter and really do work?
Yeah. So, and you mentioned there, April, the merging of the CFO and the COO role. And I've got quite a few clients that really cover that space as well. And what I see is an increased willingness and confidence to step into those spaces. So, I think some of the first benefits of working with somebody who is going to both support you and challenge you to think differently. There's an important tension in coaching that I want to be and really supportive of my client, but in the privacy and the confidentiality of the coaching space that I'm in with them, I can also really challenge them and reflect things back to them. So there's this dynamic between challenge and support. And we will work on, how do they want to walk into that next board meeting or that next investor presentation? What is it important to them to embody as a whole person as they walk in there? And that's one of the most rewarding things for me is seeing them make that shift where they really start to own their power, own their space. And as you say, it's a continual learning. So I have one CFO who was really being kind of lined up to take over that COO slash almost CEO role in their organization, a professional services firm. And that terrified her. So now this is now 5 years on since she stepped into that role. And I caught up with her just recently. And the confidence, the presence she has at the top of that professional services firm and across her industry is incredible. She's embracing the fact that she's unique, that she has a different background and set of skills to another CFO or CEO that she might have been comparing herself with in the past. So I think the first thing that happens is that we feel more satisfied. I'm happy if my clients tell me they feel more fulfilled in their work. They're getting more joy from their work. I want work to be purposeful and meaningful for people and not be burning them out. Because of course, that's often something people are discussing in coaching as well, is the overwhelm is massive. The speed is massive. So creating this space where you stop and you reflect and you work out what's most important for you and the organization is critical. So seeing people feel better and live a more fulfilled life is fabulous. And then, of course, the impact on their team. You know, if I see that their team is becoming more effective, they are keeping their staff longer, or you're hearing feedback from either the board or from their leadership peers that leadership meetings are now much more productive. You know, the CFO I referred to, who was a little bit going head to head with people because he thought he always knew the answer, they have much more productive leadership meetings now, which of course means better results and better performance for the company.
Absolutely. Can we go back to that humility thing too? I imagine that as a, like as a CFO, like you're the one you're describing, you know, it must be something pretty radical for then his team to start hearing him answer, or excuse me, ask questions. How does that
Yeah.
change the dynamic? What have you seen, when someone makes it's simple but radical, a radical shift like that?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, it's one of those things that sounds so simple, but it's not necessarily easy because we get into habits of how we work, and the people we work with also get into habits of how they respond to us. So I really encourage my clients, and with him in particular, I encouraged him to open up to his team that this is something he was working on. And that means really stepping into vulnerability, which
Right,
is challenging as well,
right.
and saying, this is something I would like to get better at because I think it will help all of us.
And
And
and did
having one or two people you will
it?
ask to call you out as well, saying to
Yeah.
somebody, call me out. If I didn't handle that the way I said I would in that meeting, then afterwards I'd like you to come and actually say that to me.
Wow.
And that is a massive shift.
Yeah, and that would be difficult even for, people like you said, everyone has their programmed, responses. So if that were me, I might have a hard time calling out the CFO. Hey,
Yeah. And of course you have to allow for that to take time,
sure.
because just it's a bit like saying, trust me. People don't trust you just because you say trust me. They trust you because you're building that rapport. They're seeing that there's an authenticity, and they also then trust that you say you'll do what you say. So they need to see this behavior practiced over time.
Sure.
So it's all very well to open the space once, and if they don't see it, you do it again, or you you do speak up. As you said, I might be a bit scared to say that to that CFO. Or if you speak up and you get shut down very quickly, or they lose their cool in some way that you've seen before, that will shut your staff down really quickly.
Right.
So it's going to take time, and that's why it can be so helpful to have a coach or a mentor that you talk to outside of your work
Yeah.
environment, because that also acts as a reminder, a check-in. Well, I tried this, it didn't work so well. How could I tweak it? How do I try it again? Or do I abandon it? Do I try it again? It's an opportunity to reflect on those things, because it is hard to initiate new behaviors. You need to put in the scaffolding around them to support them.
And then what do you hear? I mean, I guess you're hearing this feedback, secondhand, but from those who do make these changes, what do they say about their staff? What changes?
So I would say what they're saying is that their staff are happier, their staff are staying longer, they are able to coach and mentor and empower their staff. And actually, that's why right at the beginning I said, actually building some coaching skills is important,
Yeah.
because coaching is about asking the questions and empowering people. It's interesting, when we're reluctant to delegate, the message that is sending to our staff is that we don't think they're capable
Mm.
of stepping up and doing something more. Now, we have to question, do I really not think this person is capable? In which case, perhaps I've got them in the wrong role, or perhaps they need to sit at this level and I bring somebody in at a higher level to do this other piece of work. Or is it that they would love to step up and they need support to do so?
Right.
It's not just, throw everything at them and say, step up and run with it. And that requires questions as well, knowing what your staff want, taking the time to spend time with your staff and asking them about what do they want in their career.
Yeah.
We create assumptions about what people want to
Yes.
do or what they're capable of doing. It happened to me years ago. I was in a role and a new CFO was being appointed above us, and I had young children. This is, and it was just assumed that I wouldn't want to step up into the role.
Wow.
And the assumption was because I was a woman with young children at the time. And that made me so cross.
Mhm.
And now, as it was, one of my peers was put into that role and he was fantastic in the role. So, I don't take away from what he was able to do, but I felt frustrated that nobody asked the question. Nobody
Right.
gave me an
The
opportunity,
opportunity. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
also talks to the leadership presence. And I'm always encouraging my clients to put your hand up and ask for what you want.
Mm.
That's one of the things I would tell my younger self is get more clarity on what you want and then be prepared to ask for it.
Yeah. I love that.
You
What?
won't always get it, but actually you're opening the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of the three pillars that you mentioned at the beginning, do you find that one makes more of a difference faster, or do you think they're all three, equal?
That's an interesting question, April. I suppose I generally start with the what I call, so I describe it as confidence, humility, and connection. I also describe it as me, you, and us. I always start with me. So that's the confidence piece. Now, that's not to say that some of the clients who come to me don't. In fact, a lot of them do. Most of my clients, to anybody outside the coaching space, would say, she's amazingly confident. Look at her, how she presents. I just had a client say it to me just recently. She said, everyone will tell you I'm really confident. Actually, I'm coping with a really high level of stress because I'm really struggling with some self doubt here. So, the confidence piece for me is not just about presenting as confident, it's about understanding yourself. It's increasing self awareness. So, even people who are very confident in what they do, it's really valuable to reflect on what are my personal values? How do I want to show up at work, in my leadership role, and what's most important to me? So I start with that. I wouldn't say it's not necessarily more important. I don't think it's more important. I would
Yeah,
say they're all of equal importance. However, I see that confidence and me piece, the inward reflection piece, as the place to start,
that's the first step.
because I don't think until you've got that grounded confidence, there's a danger that you can, even in your questioning of others, that actually you just sit back too much in meetings, that you withdraw, that you listen, that you don't make any contribution.
Hmm.
So, you think, oh, I don't know anything about what Jane over there is presenting on, so I won't ask questions or engage because I expect everybody else knows all the answers. If you don't have a level of grounded confidence to actually
Yeah,
say, actually, I'm coming at it from a different perspective. I don't have a, you know, marketing expertise, for example. If Jane's presenting on marketing, that doesn't mean I can't ask questions that aren't relevant to the organization.
absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was we have a lot of creeks in Wyoming, and it's like if they're not nourished, if, like with, you've got to pour into yourself first, right? Because if the creek doesn't get re-nourished, replenished from snow runoff or from rain, then it dries out, and it's just the parallel, right? And so focusing on
Yeah.
yourself might seem counterintuitive.
Mm.
Um, but I feel like what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
It's the old saying about, you have to fill your own cup first,
Right.
because otherwise you can't pour for anybody else. Or the other favorite one is, putting your own oxygen mask on first on the plane
Yes.
before you help others. Because I'm no good to my team or my family if I'm running on empty.
Yeah. Do you find that
Even
that,
though I might be showing up at work every day, I'm not actually able to give my best.
right? Do you find that that affects men or women differently?
I believe that everybody is prone to this now, from what I see,
Yeah.
that CFOs and finance leaders lower down as well. Everybody is trying to do more with less.
Yeah.
So there is an enormous amount. I have so many people talk to me about the crazy long hours they're working,
Mm,
about being busy all the time, that my day is filled with meetings and then I don't get to doing my own work until, after 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. So I think that is affecting men and women, as you know, where I feel sometimes women are struggling more is because typically they still are carrying more of the domestic burden at home.
mm, right.
That's unfortunately still a reality for most families.
Yeah.
So is that so I think actually for female leaders, one of the really important things to do is have really important conversations with your partner at home,
Right.
especially if you have kids and you are, that's hard, right, to
Yeah.
manage both of you having a career and managing a family is really challenging. So the questions are, how do you have those challenging conversations at home about
Right.
who's carrying what level
Right.
of
Both,
burden
yeah,
at
in both
home.
places. Yeah, because you talk about delegation, right? And a lot of times we, like women, um, in the domestic setting have a harder time delegating. It's like, hey, maybe your husband wants to step up, or maybe your partner wants to step up, but you haven't given him the chance, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I mean, I have known women as well that say, oh, I couldn't leave the children with him while I go away on a girls' weekend. I'm like, of course you can. He's their father. He's very capable.
Right.
So there's that. But there's also whether or not he wants to step up and do it, just like I can't do it all on my own.
Right.
And we have to work it out. And if you're both working professional careers as well, it's always worth looking at, well, what else can we outsource?
Yeah.
What other help do we need, whether that's from family or friends or bought in help in terms of cleaning, or you know realizing that we don't have to do it all ourselves,
Right.
and that asking for help, and this is absolutely applicable at home and at work, asking for help is not a weakness.
Right.
It actually is going to enable you to spend more time and energy on the things that are important and of high value to you.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm gonna end on this because you and I talked a little bit offline about space. And
Mm.
so that's ultimately, it sounds like what I'm hearing is what you're ultimately trying to do is create space by delegation, whether it's at work, at home, like you're trying to create
Yep.
space for being that change agent, for those, that creativity to be able to come out because if you're booked from, 6 till 6, there's no space. So talk to
Yeah.
me a little bit about that space, how to create it, why
Yeah.
it's important.
It's I believe it's absolutely critical, because you cannot, as you just said, April, you cannot start to think more creatively and about more innovation if you don't have the space for thinking. If you're continually going back to back meetings and you're continually do, it's all about the task, it's all about the deadlines. You need the space. And for me, this is a critical factor in stepping up from being a finance lead or being more focused on the finance function into truly becoming a more strategic leader. And conversations I'm having with CEOs and business leaders is that they want their CFOs to really partner with them and be strategic leaders of the business. And so it means we have to prioritize creating that space. And that means some hard choices. It means ruthless prioritization. It does mean delegating more. And I always say to people, start small in that space. If you can carve out a couple of hours, let's say on a Monday morning, but wherever that fits in your calendar, carve out a couple of hours, which is like booking a meeting with yourself. And you absolutely honor it. You don't let anybody else put a meeting over the top in your calendar. You don't let somebody wander into your office and have a big chat. You honor that time, and then you decide, you get intentional about what are the things I'm going to do in that time. Now, initially that might be, of course, it's challenging to block out that time, but you have to ask yourself, is this really important to me? And if it is, I've got to make the time. And as I say, delegation, ruthless prioritization, so that you have that time. And then you can start saying, well, what am I going to do in that time? Do I need to do some reading on my industry? Do I need to be thinking, like blue sky thinking about where we could go next with our industry, with our organization? It's, as you said, really focusing more on the future, less on the past, but not just in the budgeting and forecasting sense. Actually allowing yourself to think more broadly and, what are the possibilities? What are the opportunities? It's doing the thing we all probably did back in uni, like a SWOT analysis. It is starting to think of those as, and also who are the people I should be talking to? So in your 2 hours, let's say that's what we've started with, who are the people I need to get out and meet? So that I've got my thinking time, I'm going to create a list, and then I'm actually going to follow up and say, right, I need to catch up with this person next week, and I need to ask them questions so I have a deeper understanding of that area of the business. So that time is important, and I think you absolutely need to build up from there, but start small. If you're struggling to find space, which most people are, start small and then build up. One client said recently she had been working in the office full time. Her CEO would like her in the office full time. And we talked through this, and she said, actually, I think what I need is one day from home. Because that one day from home, yes, I can do some online meetings, but I'm not going to get the constant interruptions in the way I do in the office. So on that day, I'm going to make sure I block out plenty of time for the forward-looking piece, because otherwise this CEO is going to fully believe that I only focus on, the financial function and operations of the business, and that I'm either not interested or don't have the capability to step up and think about the strategic questions. So it's important to create the space to do some thinking, and then that thinking needs to come out of that space into your conversations with other leaders, so that they know you're thinking in that way.
Yeah, that's not, again, so simple, so simple. And I hope that people listening can, if nothing else, that they take one thing that they heard from you and put it into action, and then just watch the ripple effect of that one change, whether that be just starting to be curious and asking questions, or whether that be setting a meeting with yourself and creating space, just so simple. But I know that that a lot of people, even if they know they should, or maybe, it's like they're hearing it now, and they thought to themselves, I should do that. And so this is your permission slip. Yes, you should do it. Whatever it is that Sue said that stood out to you, do it. And then go hire a coach. So Sue, if someone does want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that? And we can put, if it's a link, I'll make sure and include it in their materials.
Yeah. So I'm very present on LinkedIn, so they can certainly find me just Sue
Okay.
Rosen on LinkedIn, or reach out by email, which is sue@suerosen.com.au. So
Okay.
quite
Perfect.
easy.
Yeah. I'll make
But
sure
yeah,
and
if you can put
include
that in the
that.
show notes, then yeah, great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I always learn a lot, from these conversations and, think to myself, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. I should do that. So I really
Yeah,
appreciate it. And thank you again for taking the time.
fantastic. Thank you, April. Lovely to join you for this conversation.
All right.